I want to talk about a topic we've been talking a lot about over the past month. Boeing expected to cap that rocky 2019 with weak December deliveries. The number will be released today. David Calhoun's second day as CEO on the job. At the same time, Bloomberg reporting Boeing convinced Indonesia's Lion Air the year before its fatal 737 MAX crash that Lion Air's pilots didn't need simulator training. In one message released last week, but provided unredacted to Bloomberg, one Boeing employee referred to Lion Air employees as idiots. Also in the past 24 hours, Democratic Senator Edward Markey urging Boeing's board to cancel the bonus that Calhoun will receive when the 737 MAX returns, and Boeing defending the compensation plan. Joining us on Squawk's Newsline right now to talk about all of this, Ralph Nader. His niece died on Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 last year. Ralph, thanks for joining us, trying to help us make sense of where we stand in, I hate to call it a saga, but it has become that. First, your take on David Calhoun now in the job on his second day, and whether you think he's going to be able to change the dynamic.
Well, David Calhoun has been on the board of Boeing for about 10 years, so he's the keeper of the secrets. He's part of the problem where the board rubber-stamped Mr. Muhlenberg and his executive corps in disinvesting in Boeing and going in 2011 with the hooked-up planning for the 737 MAX. So he also hails from many years in General Electric under Jack Welch, where he learned to engage in severe cost-cutting, anti-union activity, and laid the basis for the hollowing out of General Electric to this day. It's just a shadow of itself. So it's hard to see any qualifications by Mr. Calhoun to turn the Boeing Corporation around.
Well, but don't you want to give him an opportunity? I mean, don't you want to give, I don't want to say a honeymoon in this context, but don't you want to give him some time to see if he can turn this around?
Well, he's already had a lot of opportunity. He was the leading member of the board working with Muhlenberg for years. He's approved Muhlenberg's $80 million package after Muhlenberg was fired. So he's not a fresh face. The board of directors is a crony board or a board that doesn't have any experience.
Ralph, what's a fair way? When would be a fair time and way to measure David Calhoun's success or failure in terms of trying to fix the problems at this company, recognizing your view that he is not the right person to be in that job?
Well, first of all, he's got to elevate the engineers to the decision-making instead of the financiers. That's one. The second, they did make a final good decision after having to reverse themselves on simulator training. That's going to cost Boeing at least $5 billion. Simulator training for the pilots around the world on the 737 MAX. But he's got to change the culture of the corporation, and he comes from a financial background. It's going to be hard to see how
it's a big job and may take some time. Let me ask you a question about money and compensation, because we've talked about it even just yesterday. We were debating this issue. As you referred to, and I think the number is closer to $62 million rather than 80, but Dennis Muhlenberg, when he left, he did not receive severance. However, he did receive compensation that, from what we understand, he was due, in large part because it was deferred compensation over his 35-year career. He was paid a salary, of course, and then put a percentage of that into deferred comp and also had vested shares. You're arguing that he still should not have been paid that money?
Well, he bungled the whole corporation. I mean,
I'm not dismissing the problems that took place at the company. I'm suggesting that was he entitled to that money? Whether he was overpaid or not, there are people who will debate that as well. But to the extent that you have been paid over a 35-year career a certain amount of money, you put some of that aside as part of a deferred compensation plan and their vested shares. You believe that was still at the discretion of the board, and they made the wrong decision to pay it out? Is that your view?
Contractually, they may be obligated, but in terms of optics, in terms of equity, in terms of how he bungled the company, they should have pushed for forfeiture. That's been known in corporate executive suites, forfeiture. And also his collaborators came away with millions of dollars, too, the head of the commercial air transport. The bottom line is that Boeing, and this is the subject of a lawsuit last month by Flyers Rights against the FAA, the Boeing company, in collaboration with the FAA, still refuses to disclose the technical details of Boeing's proposed software fixes, including the MCAS. That's why Flyers Rights under Paul Hudson has filed the suit for failure to respond to a Freedom of Information Act request. So, it's still business as usual. Boeing has still got Senator Wicker doing nothing in the Senate. The House is trying to do its job under Congressman Peter DeFazio, but there's very little cooperation between Senator Wicker. He hasn't asked for the documents that the House has gotten. So the FAA still has the same old guys who...
well, that was my question. What kind of confidence do you have in the FAA at this point?
Pardon?
What kind of confidence or lack of confidence do you have in the FAA at this point?
Well, there's a little confidence in the new administrator, Steve Dixon, but he's still hobbled by Mr. El-Barimi and Mr. Elwell, his predecessors, who are still there. And they're part of the problem. You see, usually when there's a tremendous corporate regulatory crisis, people lose their jobs. Well, finally, Muhlenberg has lost his job, but not the FAA. And the FAA still hasn't asked Congress for an adequate budget and adequate staff. They're still wedded to this delegation abdication posture instead of regulation of the Boeing company.
Before we let you go, I want to pivot to another topic, news this morning. I want to get your reaction to something that BlackRock CEO Larry Fink told us about climate change. Here he is talking about the scale of the issue and how the firm plans to deal with it.
We don't have a Federal Reserve to stabilize the world like in the 5 or 6 financial crises that occurred during my 40 years in finance. This is bigger. It requires more planning. It requires more public-private connections together to solve these problems. And I do believe many of these problems could be solved, but the actions have to begin now.
Of what Larry Fink's doing, and how do you do it in a way that both is sustainable but also economically viable for people on all parts of the economic ladder there?
Well, Lawrence Fink has made these statements before. The question is whether he can exert the $5 trillion power machine of his company on the big banks that are investing tens of billions of dollars in fossil fuel, led by J.P. Morgan Chase. That's one thing he can do. There's a new book coming out on the Pentagon is severely worried as a national security risk of climate chaos and climate disruption. That's another powerful arm. Maybe they can reach the climate denier Donald Trump in the White House. And then the third is the Federal Reserve is starting to get into this. It deals with economic instability at a colossal level. And we shouldn't be worrying about the reduction of the fossil fuel sales and being replaced by renewable energy and energy conservation. We've got the solutions. We've got to take them off the shelf and put them down. There's no greater disruptor of the economy than continuing the status quo.
Okay. Ralph Nader, appreciate your time and perspective this morning. Thank you.